A listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to this special election edition of the afternoon briefing. We are joined this afternoon by Liberal Leader Peter Dutton. Just a week out from polling day, a record number of Australians have already voted, with a new exit poll out today showing Labor is on track to win. At the start of this election campaign, polls were actually quite the opposite, with the Albanese government under fire and out of favour over the cost of living crisis. Mr Dutton admits he is the underdog, but says the fight is far from over. Mr Dutton, thank you so much for joining us. As we know, the polls can sometimes be wrong. The latest exit polls today put Labor in front again. Cost of living crisis was front and centre at the beginning of the campaign. If we believe the polls, you were in front. What do you think has gone so wrong with your election campaign?
Well, Natarsha, the exit polls showed only a couple of months ago that, and by exactly the same news outlet, that Stephen Miles was likely to become the Premier. He was neck and neck. I think there was a point difference between he and David Crisafulli. And we obviously know that the LNP stormed home in a pretty thumping way. So I don't think the exit polling of a couple of hundred people is an indication of where things are at. If I speak to our people over the last couple of days since pre-polling's opened in marginal seats, their advice, and these are people who are pretty seasoned, say that the response has been better than it was in 2022. But otherwise, the point I'd make to your question is, look, Labor's spent upwards of $20 million essentially defaming me, and their whole scare campaign's built on a house of cards, just lie after lie. I think some of that starts to fall away when people examine the Prime Minister's claims around Mediscare, and we're going to Americanise the health system because he thinks that is going to have an impact because people, start to think of President Trump when he talks America. It's all fabricated. And I think ultimately people are just worried more about their own cost of living pressures and worried about what it means for their family, their small business. And I think we've got an excellent policy offering. And as people examine that, I do think the polls will tighten. And certainly our internal polling, the track polling, gives us great confidence at the moment.
Mr Dutton, talking about policies, talking about a house of cards, a lot of people have come out saying that the coalition has policies at the moment on the run, that there doesn't seem to be a lot of depth with your policies, and there's been a couple of concerning backflips, including working from home and just overnight, the EV tax deduction backflip. Can you understand why some Australians may be concerned about these backflips?
Well, just to detail what we've got on offer. 25 cent a litre cut for fuel. That's a $6 billion investment, and it helps families, and it's economy-wide. So it brings prices down for tradies, for pensioners, for young people. We've got a $1,200 tax rebate, which has been worked on for a long period of time. It provides people with $1,200 of their own money back at a time when people are really struggling to pay the bills. We've got an energy policy which includes an East Coast gas reserve and a nuclear transition, which frankly is probably the biggest energy policy and the most significant energy policy produced either by a government or opposition, certainly in recent decades. So I actually reject the criticism outright. There is a Labor Party, dirt unit that's very effective and very influential, I might say, with some people in the gallery who run these lines that the Labor Party puts out. The EV policy we announced in relation to fringe benefits tax, it hasn't changed. I had a journalist pointing today to policy meetings during the week. It's just complete and utter nonsense. So I just think cut through all of that and deal with what people are actually voting on. That is, how do we help them? We're living in the biggest downturn in living standards of any other country, comparable country in the world. And people have had 7 consecutive quarters now of negative growth in their households. So people have been in household recession for almost 2 years. Frankly, they're not interested in the Beltway stuff. They're interested in how we can help them. And for the 30,000 small businesses which have gone broke over the last 2.5, 3 years, they want to know how are they going to get back on their feet, and they certainly won't do it under this government.
So, Mr Dutton, you're denying that there was a backflip on working from home, and you're denying you did a backflip on the EV tax rebates and tax deductions.
There's been no change in relation to the EV issue, and in relation to work from home. What we said was that we wanted to make changes which the Labor Party somehow distorted into being an economy-wide issue, that every employee in every workplace where we were actually talking about employees working for the Commonwealth Government in Canberra. And the scare campaign was run by Labor. It scared a lot of people unnecessarily because that wasn't the intent of the policy. And we stepped back from that policy. We apologised for the concern that Labor was able to whip up. And ultimately, I think if you're a government that has a successful 3-year term in government, you start talking about what you've done for people, how you've helped people, how people have gone forward over the last 3 years, how businesses have succeeded. They can't talk about that, Natarsha, and this is a really important point. If the Prime Minister had a good story to tell of the last 3 years, he would be out there singing it from the rooftops. But instead, they're running this smear campaign, throwing mud, because they don't want to talk about what has been a missed opportunity and a failed 3 years for our country.
But Mr Dutton, one may argue if he doesn't have a good story to tell, according to the polls, the majority of Australians are still going to vote for Labor. So you would say cost of living crisis, people are worse off now than they were 3 years ago, but they're still voting for Labor.
Well, I think there are many factors involved in this election. I mean, the fact is that a first-term government hasn't lost since 1931. So people's instinct is to, say, well, he's only had 3 years, we'll give him a go. He's out of his depth, he seems weak, and they've made some bad decisions, but do we just, wait and see what happens? There's that element, and we knew that. I mean, it's almost a century since you've had a first-term government change, and that's the culture in Australia. So there's that element as well as the negative advertising. And I think, again, I'm very confident given our internal polling. And when you look at the marginal seats that we need to win, when you look at the effort by the candidates in each of those seats relative to either the incumbent Labor member or an incumbent Teal or an incumbent Greens member, we have a great deal of confidence in the seats that we're tracking at the moment. And when you have a look at where Labor's spending money and where they're spending effort, they're sandbagging seats. There's a lot of propaganda out there and a lot of misinformation, frankly, that I think is put out by the spin doctors of the Labor Party. And the internal polling I'm seeing gives us confidence that we can chart a course to victory. But it's tight. There are many seats that are on a 50-50 margin at the moment, and we've got a lot of hard work to do over the next 9 or 10 days.
Mr Dutton, talking about seats, Clive Palmer has put your MPs last on his voting cards, threatening a number of seats, including your own Brisbane electorate. I just want to quote Mr Palmer here. He talks about the coalition. They have not announced any real significant policy initiatives. And he talks about himself here, Mr Palmer, saying he's had 40 years' experience in the Liberal Party and, quote, I've observed that coalition members make promises in an election and never carry them out in office. What's your response to Mr Palmer's comments there?
Well, my response is that this election, there are two choices to make. One is between Anthony Albanese for another 3 years as Prime Minister or to vote for the coalition so that we can get our economy back on track. That's the choice that people have. So I would advise people to make sure that they support their Liberal or National Party candidate, to vote one for them and not worry about the minor parties who are parties of disruption and parties that won't be able to do anything other than cause difficulties for a minority government, a minority parliament. And we need stability. We need the ability to deal with Labor's mess, start to pay down some of Labor's debt, start to help families, start to help Australians recover from a 30% increase in food prices, 34% increase in gas, a 32% increase in electricity. So my advice would be forget about those that are sitting up in the cheap seats. Have a look at the options between the two parties. And I don't believe that Australians can afford 3 more years of Anthony Albanese. And we may have a global recession. We might have conflict in Europe or the Middle East or in our own region. And I believe Australia needs a Prime Minister who has the ability, the experience and the strength of character to be able to stand up for what's in our country's best interests.
Mr Dutton, talking about your electorate, the Labor candidate in your seat, Ali Frantz, retweeted fake photos of both you and Mr Turnbull dressed as Nazis and has also, I'm re-quoting here, called you a monster. Here is the Prime Minister, Mr Albanese's response to this today, and I'll play you that audio.
Ali Frantz is someone who lost her leg saving her child's life. Ali France is an extraordinary Australian, and I don't know what your tweets are like more than a decade ago or what have you. I have no idea. But people are going and attacking Ali France as they did during the last campaign.
What's your response to that, Mr Dutton? Is that acceptable?
Well, it's an issue for the Prime Minister, and people will make their own judgments about whether the Labor candidate in Dixon is fit to hold public office. People can make mistakes. I don't believe that this is a one-off circumstance, and it follows a pattern of conduct for a long period of time, and people can make their own, draw their own conclusions in relation to that candidate. But the Prime Minister, I think, by digging deeper on this issue, is frankly trashing his own credibility, although he is preferencing in his own seat of Grainless somebody who is anti-Semitic and opposed to the Jewish people. So I guess this is the standard that the Prime Minister is willing to accept, and it says a lot about the Prime Minister. It says a lot about the Dixon Labor candidate, and I think people in my electorate who are pretty savvy and they've seen the Labor Party put up some bad candidates before, I think rapidly they'll draw the conclusion that reasonable people would, that the Labor candidate in Dixon is not fit to hold public office.
Mr Dutton, in regards to cost of living, shortly behind that, top of mind for voters, is the housing crisis. Now, you've announced a number of policies where you're hoping to be able to fix the housing crisis, the rental crisis that is affecting millions of Australians. I want to ask you, with capital gains tax and negative gearing, why do you believe any Australian or resident of Australia should own more than 2 properties? Surely that is not fair and equitable.
Well, Natarsha, what if they own a commercial property worth $5 million? Let's say it's a family, third generation, they own a fruit shop. Maybe they own a cafe or a restaurant. Maybe they own a block of flats that their grandparents built many years ago. It might be worth $5-10 million today. Is it wrong for those people to have that asset and to borrow against that asset? Is it wrong for you as an investor on the equity market to go out and purchase $10 million worth of shares and use a margin loan and claim the deduction for that margin loan? Housing is just another asset class. And if you invest into your superannuation fund, as everybody must, the superannuation fund can own houses that other people live in, but not your own house. And what we've said is that the tax settings that operate under the Prime Minister's want are going to change, because they are going to tax an unrealised capital gain. That's their policy. The Greens want them to abolish negative gearing and abolish the discount on capital gains tax. That has been researched by the Treasurer. That work has been done for the Albanese government. So there is a great deal of uncertainty as to what tax settings would change and whether negative gearing would be abolished under Mr Albanese. I want more houses built, and we'll build more houses if people are prepared to invest in housing. And if we say to investors, we're going to stop you from investing into housing, we won't have rental stock. And whilst people are renting, I want them to be able to save for their own deposit. The Prime Minister's brought in 1 million people over 2 years. That is a 70% increase on any 2-year period in our country's history. That's why, and understandably, all of those people want a house to either rent or buy for them, for their families. And that's why young Aussies have been locked out of housing. So there's a supply and demand side here. Our policy supports the release of 500,000 new homes through a $5 billion fund that we work on with councils to overcome infrastructure bottlenecks. We put in place, I think, a really revolutionary policy, and it reflects the difficulty that young Australians have getting into housing, which is for the first $650,000, that's deductible. So that helps you when you make your application to the bank in terms of your affordability, but it also helps you each month pay off that loan, and that's for the first 5 years. We also cut migration, and we stop foreign buyers from competing against young Australians in purchasing that house. So I think we've got a comprehensive policy, frankly, that works much more effectively.
But there's been a lot of housing experts, both sides, both Labor and the Coalition, saying all your policies are going to do, they're not going to fix the long-term issues of the housing crisis. All they're going to do is push up housing prices. And just referring back to my previous question, I think the majority of Australians are okay with someone having an investment property, especially if it's been in the family. They have an issue that a politician has 7 investment properties. That could be a number of politicians. Do you think that's fair and equitable?
Well, it could be anybody, a politician, a media star on $1 million a year, a sports person. Everybody's treated equally under the law. And as long as you're abiding by the rules of the law and you're paying tax and you're claiming what you're eligible to pay, I don't really have a problem with who it is. As long as they're abiding by the law, every Australian is equal. And I just think it's a pretty silly argument, to be frank, in whether somebody in the Labor Party or the whatever party has half a dozen rental properties, or some person in media has $1 million worth of shares. It's no interest to me. I want to make sure that we have a housing market. If the economists that you're referring to suggest that housing prices should come down, well, I think there would be millions of Australians who say, I don't agree with that, because I just bought a house. I've got a $750,000 mortgage on $1 million house. I don't want the price of the house to come down. I want it to increase gradually over time. But if you bring 1 million people in over 2 years, you are going to create a housing crisis. And that's exactly what has happened, because you've just fueled demand, and the CFMEU and others are running right across the economy. And that means that building costs have gone up, lesser number of houses have been built. Under the government's signature flagship housing policy, in 3 years, they've not completed one home. And that I think speaks to the incompetence of this government. So I want more people to get into the housing market, but the housing market has not been fueled over the last few years by negative gearing. It's been fueled by 1 million people coming into the market demanding to buy a house, which is why people are 30 and 40 deep at rental properties. That didn't happen pre-COVID. There were demands on rental properties for sure, but the crisis that the government's created is largely through the migration program. And that's why at this election, we're the only party going to the election promising to cut migration so that we can get young Australians into housing.
Mr. Dutton, finally, we appreciate your time on a very, very busy schedule. What would your message be to voters a number of days out from the election? You are officially, according to the polls, they can be wrong, you're the underdog. Why should Australians vote for you?
Well, we're certainly the underdog, and I think there's a real argument for a change of government in our country. I think it's a sliding doors moment for our country. Australians have a choice to make. Do you want 3 more years similar to the last 3 years? And I just don't believe Australian families can afford that. The Prime Minister promised a $275 reduction in the cost of energy. It's gone up by $1,300. The government promised to make sure that your mortgage was cheaper. Interest rates have gone up on 12 occasions. They've fueled inflation, which has kept interest rates higher for longer. I don't think that young families, I don't think that pensioners or small businesses can afford 3 more years of Labor, particularly if it's a Labor Greens minority government. That means higher interest rates. On the other hand, a coalition government which has experience, which will manage the economy effectively in a way that we can bring down inflation. We can cut the fuel tax by 25 cents a litre, which helps about $14 a week every time you fill up your car. That is a savings, $1,200 of your own money back through a tax rebate. And then we fix Labor's mess of its renewables-only policy by bringing more gas that we export at the moment into the domestic market. That brings the wholesale price of gas down by 23%. That will help lower the cost of groceries. It'll help lower the cost of construction materials. And we want to make sure that we live in a safe community, a safe country. And we do that by investing in defence and our $750 million investment into our law and order policy. And as we've just discussed, a huge reason as to why people should change the government is that only the coalition will give young Australians the chance of home ownership again. And we're absolutely determined to do it. I want to be the Prime Minister for home ownership and home affordability and accessibility. And I believe that young Australians being locked out of housing at the moment is inequitous. And I don't support the government's deliberate strategy of trying to drive young Australians into a rent for life model. I believe that they should be given every opportunity to buy a house if they choose to do so.
We wish you the best for Saturday week. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Take care.
And that was Liberal Leader Peter Dutton. And that's it for this special election episode of the afternoon briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, or on TikTok and YouTube. You just need to search Listener Newsroom, spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you then.